Good morning, everybody. As folks are still arriving, I just want to say thanks for being here, and to Jesse for all the work that you did to create this incredible report, and Hannah and Abe and Sister Alice and all of you who helped through the process. Just want to say thank you before we get started.
Yeah. Happy to be here.
Yeah, just 1 or 2 more minutes, we'll get started right at 9 o'clock. Okay, well, we can go ahead and get started. Other folks might be joining, but they can just, yep. So thank you all so much for coming. I will try and keep this as short, as sweet as possible. I know that we all have a lot to do today. My name is Jessie Frank, and I am the Peace and Nonviolence and Anti-Death Penalty Program Manager at the Intercommunity Justice and Peace Center. IJPC advocates and educates for peace, challenges unjust local, national, and global systems, promotes the creation of a nonviolent society. Through a framework of nonviolence, IJPC works to end the death penalty in Ohio, educate about human trafficking, promote immigrant justice, and foster peace. So we've got our hands in a few different issues. Ever since the threat of resuming executions in Ohio became a reality in 1999, IJPC has worked to end the death penalty here. Throughout the years, IJPC has worked for abolition by educating the greater Cincinnati community about Ohio's ineffective, unjust death penalty system, advocating on behalf of individual inmates when appropriate, advocating for the needs of murder victims' families, and offering support to families with loved ones on death row. I'm going to begin by making a brief statement about the report, and then I'll be followed by statements from several colleagues if they wish to do so. For our friends in the media, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please use the chat box and then we can answer them following all of the statements. I will also be sending to media some supplemental photos and pamphlets. So if you have an email, a specific email that I don't have that you'd like me to send those to, please just put your email in the chat box as well. IJPC has always renounced the death penalty. Founded and supported by a network of religious communities, it has always argued that the death penalty is immoral, believing in the inherent dignity of every human being and that all people are worthy of forgiveness and capable of redemption. But IJPC has also worked to educate the community about the factual injustices of capital punishment and the ways in which its application is both arbitrary and biased. Hoping to challenge the death penalty from a database perspective, IJPC has worked for about the past year to investigate the cost of the death penalty in Hamilton County, as well as the disparities its arbitrary application encourages. We are so excited today to release the findings of our new report, At All Costs, the High Cost of the Death Penalty in Hamilton County and the Disparities it Drives. Since the 90s, 8 death sentences that originated in Hamilton County have been reduced to some other sentence. The cost of the average case of those 8 cases in this report was $1,077,762.68, which is roughly double that of a life without the possibility of parole sentence, which costs Ohio about $562,000. I really want to emphasize, though, that this estimate is almost certainly conservative, since a lot of costs, such as the total cost of the death penalty to prosecutors and the total cost to the courts, are unknown. Other studies that are a little more vigorous than ours was have found that the death penalty usually costs states $1 million to $3 million more dollars than life without the possibility of parole cases. So that's about double what our study found. Ohio has not yet completed a comprehensive fiscal review of capital punishment, or any substantive fiscal review for that matter. So only using simple amateur methods of data and using data that was available to the public, literally going to the clerk's office and sifting through files, we're almost positive that this report is conservative. But it's meant to offer a small glimpse into the true cost of capital punishment to Ohio, its counties, and its taxpayers. The second part of our report, following the cost portion, examines the death penalty's arbitrary application, which presents geographic and racial disparities, as well as concerns about the quality of defendants' legal representation, and considers those concerns alongside the exorbitant cost of the death penalty. Notably, for this second part, no new data was collected, but much of the existing racial and geographic data that did exist was raw data that was recorded in spreadsheets on various government websites, which made it really difficult for the public to readily interpret. Also, there were some sources that already had attempted to analyze this data, but most of them were either dated or they failed to examine this data in context with the cost. So the second part of our report is a unique analysis of the ways in which these factors and this data influences the death penalty's application in Ohio and in Hamilton County. While this report is not prescriptive, it does urge the state to adopt a restorative justice approach that focuses on healing communities and addresses systemic causes of violence rather than pursuing revenge via capital punishment. In particular, the report invites more services and care for murder victims' families. Given the favorable anti-death penalty foothold that began gaining traction early last year when Governor Mike DeWine began halting executions and ordered ODRC to find a new lethal injection protocol that would pass constitutional challenges, the possibility of abolishing the death penalty here in Ohio has become very real. It is our hope that this report will break open a conversation about the death penalty's ineffectiveness, arbitrariness, and hefty price tag. Why are we spending millions of dollars prosecuting a capital case knowing that there is only a 2% chance that a decades-long battle will end in an execution? Does this system benefit the entire state when 69 of Ohio's 88 counties have never executed someone? How can we support a system in which 53% of Black people on Ohio's death row are there for killing a white person, while only 5% of white people are there for killing a Black person? How can we call our system a justice system when an inability to afford adequate defense is the main reason most death sentences are overturned in the state? This week, the federal government is preparing to execute Brandon Bernard Thursday, which is Human Rights Day, and Alfred Bourgeois on Friday. 3 more federal executions are scheduled for the lame duck presidential term. IJPC and the entire death penalty movement have been shaken by this year's unprecedented federal executions that have murdered more federal death row inmates than ever before in a single year. Ohio has the opportunity to diverge from this tough on crime act charaded by the federal government and abolish the vengeful, violent political weapon that is the death penalty. Especially during this time of economic crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic, coupled with the national racial reckoning we've experienced this summer, it is clear that we need an economy and a justice system that is driven by the community's needs. It is time that we show compassion to the most broken among us, promote real healing for the grieving, and use data-based reasoning to retire an expensive system that is draining our much-needed resources and chipping away at our humanity. IJPC could not do any of this work without the help of a multitude of partners, and we are so grateful to have some of them here with us today. So I'll begin by introducing Hannah Cubbins, who is the Executive Director at Ohioans to Stop Executions. Hannah, if you'd like to make a statement, you can go for it.
Absolutely, and thank you, Jesse. I think you covered most of what I wanted to say, so I'll just add a few things here and there. I'm really encouraged to see organizations like IJPC and other orgs that have been promoting repealing the death penalty for a while, having this conversation about the system and its irreparable flaws, which we know cost is one of them. And as Jesse just mentioned, as we're trying to get on this road to economic recovery amidst this pandemic, and it's time to really take a look at what are we spending in this state, what are we getting in return for what we're spending. And we know that the death penalty ultimately just does not serve Ohioans or keep communities safe. And so, as Jesse alluded to, it's really hard to put a concrete number on the expenses of the death penalty. But there is an interesting anecdote I wanted to share from one of my colleagues in Tennessee. She does similar work there, reforming and ultimately ending the death penalty in the state. And she was doing some research, and she needed the transcripts of all the litigation of a man on death row there. His case was far from fully litigated. He still had several avenues for appeal, and just getting those transcripts for the case would have cost my colleague $17,000 and that's just printing costs. And so that's how much paper there was just for one death penalty case that hadn't yet finished at appeals. So to conduct a proper and comprehensive cost study, you not only need several years, 2 to 3, I think conservatively, but you also need hundreds of thousands of dollars. So doing smaller county-based cost studies like this incredible report by IJPC are incredibly helpful, especially higher use death penalty counties, because it shows how much Ohioans are spending on just a select few cases. Another great example comes from 2017, the Akron Beacon Journal took a look at 2 aggravated murder cases, one that was seeking death and one that was not, and compared the cost between the two. The cost for the non-death penalty case was about $19,000, whereas the one seeking death was upwards of $270,000. So as you can see, there's a huge disparity in cost there, depending on if you're seeking death or not. To make it more local to Hamilton County, since that's the topic of the report, this number may be different by now, but in February 2020, there were about 478 unsolved homicides in the county. Communities want to feel safe and hold offenders accountable. And instead of spending millions on the death penalty in Ohio, which we know does not deter violent crime, I think we should instead be having the conversation about diverting those resources to solving unsolved cases, particularly in Hamilton County, and assisting loved ones who are left behind after a violent crime. So thank you so much to Jesse at IJPC and everyone who worked on this report, and for inviting OTSI to be a part of this as well. And super thrilled that we're having this conversation and folks are being made more aware of these astronomical costs of a system that just simply doesn't serve us anymore. So thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. Next up is Abe Bonowitz, who is the co-founder of Death Penalty Action. Abe.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you. I'm excited to be here with you all, and I want to commend IJPC for taking this leap and putting in the investment to create this report, which is a remarkable and thorough document that only serves as just one more piece of evidence about how broken Ohio's death penalty system is. I want to share with you that I came into this movement in favor of the death penalty. And I got up at meetings of Amnesty International on the campus of Ohio State University and argued with people. I argued with Adele Schenk, who's one of our leading capital defense attorneys. I said, an eye for an eye. I said, I'll pull the switch myself. I said, this is the United States. We have the best justice system in the world. And if that includes the death penalty, fine with me. Then I set out to prove those anti-death penalty people wrong. And in trying to prove them wrong, I found out that I was wrong about almost everything I thought about the death penalty. The thing that changed my mind was hearing Professor Michael Andrus from Xavier University. I don't believe he's with us anymore, but I was at a conference where he spoke, and he spoke to me, even though I was one of hundreds of people sitting in the audience. He said, if you're going to kill somebody in Ohio, just don't do it in Franklin County, Cuyahoga County, or Hamilton County. And really, it's Cuyahoga County and Hamilton County, as you can see once again from this report, because those are the counties that can afford a death penalty trial. Killing a rural county, they can't afford a death penalty because they don't have the tax base. And we've seen, as we saw with the murders in Pike County, the legislature has to approve special funding for rural counties that don't have a large tax base to be able to afford a death penalty trial. And let's remember that a death penalty trial is a roll of the dice. You're not necessarily always going to get a conviction. And if you do, you might not get a death sentence. But when they decide they're going to seek a death sentence, they're deciding to spend a lot more money. And especially when they get it wrong. I mean, as the report indicates, 25 of the death sentences that came out of Hamilton County have been thrown out due to exonerations or other reasons. But especially when you have somebody like Derek Jameson or Ahmad Issa, they were wrongly convicted. Derek spent 20 years on Ohio's death row for a crime he had nothing to do with. And all the money that our state spent was wasted. So what we know is that we can be safe from dangerous offenders and hold them accountable without executions. It's what we do the vast majority of the time. And in fact, when we have, and I'm very grateful for Governor DeWine, he has put everything on hold, and rightly so. And but when we have a politician that says we need the death penalty and we need it for the victim families, what they're really saying to the vast majority of victim families is, your loved one wasn't valuable enough. We're not going to spend the resources. And we haven't heard anything said about it yet too much, but there was a joint task force on the administration of Ohio's death penalty. And they issued a report in 2014 that has pretty much sat on the shelf with a few exceptions. Some of the recommendations have been implemented through judicial rule changes, and a few have been legislative. We're waiting for Senate Bill 54 to be passed. And it's already passed in the House. It just needs a vote on the Senate floor. And one of the recommendations, though, was to look into the needs of victim families. And that was shortchanged, and that is addressed in this report, what happened there. We still haven't done it. Ohio has a domestic violence survivors network. We have a rape survivors network. We don't have the resources thoroughly put into equally applying resources for murder victim families in Ohio. And that's something that's needed and which could be done. In addition to the ideas about preventing murder and helping communities, the aftermath of murder will always be a need. And that's something we could be doing better with this funding. So, I want to say two more things. One is, like I said, we can be safe from dangerous offenders and hold them accountable. It's what we do the vast majority of the time. And life without the possibility of parole is what the vast majority of capital defendants get. But I want to give that a different name. It's actually death in prison. It's still a death sentence. It's just not us killing and wasting all that money that could be spent otherwise. Finally, I want to say there's also Senate Bill 294. 294. And in that bill, Senator Nikki Antonio introduced it. Many of us were standing with her when she did so. It asks the Ohio legislature to abolish the federal death penalty now. And there's no reason not to do it now in the lame duck session. It could do it if they wanted to. And we're calling on people in addition, with IJPC and other partners to let's just get rid of the death penalty, save the money, redirect it. So those are our possibilities. And if you go, I'll put a link in the chat. We've got some action opportunities for people to take to actually move forward on this issue, to take action. So thank you very much for having me, and congratulations on this report.
Thanks so much, Abe. I'm going to pass it over to Sister Alice Gerdeman, who's a Sister of Divine Providence and has been a death penalty activist for decades. Sister Alice, I think, is going to share a little bit with us about some of what Abe was talking about innocence and the possibility that we are executing, or at least having some people spend decades on death row. And that's part of the significance why we chose this week to host this press conference, because Elwood Jones is a man from Hamilton County who is currently on death row and has been there for quite some time. And he was supposed to have a hearing to determine whether he would receive a new trial this Friday. So Sister Alice, if you could talk a little bit more about that, that would be wonderful.
Thanks, Jesse, and congratulations on this report. As I was reading it, I was remembering something that was said, and I forget by whom, when we were looking at the 2014 study, in which they said part of the problem in Ohio is that we have 88 different justice systems because each county has its own way of keeping records, et cetera. Thank goodness somebody has done one county at least. If we can, all we need, I think, is a few more to show again that what is happening in our state is certainly not a justice. Yes, I would like to call attention to the case of Elwood Jones. Elwood is a Hamilton County case. He was supposed to, he expected to have a hearing on whether or not he should receive a new trial based upon some evidence that he and his legal team have found that was not considered, or not considered completely at the time of his trial. 26 years on death row certainly has taken a toll on this man, a man who has claimed innocence during that entire time. It's hard for me to even comprehend what it would be like to be imprisoned with a death threat over him at all times. And indeed, there is an execution date set, which will probably not be utilized. But to have that happen to you over and over again is an inhumane way of treating people. And so I urge all of us to look at that case again and to call for justice for this man. He deserves to, as all people have a right to have their dignity respected. He has the right to have his case re-looked at so that he can show, to the best of his ability, and it's not easy to show it from a prison cell, that there has been injustice in his case. I'd also like to just make a couple of other comments. One of the things that strikes me is that there are very few people who don't think that killing another human being is a bad thing to do. Yet we allow our state to do it. Pope Francis reminded us not too long ago that the real motivation for most of the death sentences and the executions that happen has little or nothing to do with safety, has little or nothing to do with justice. It has to do with vengeance, and it has to do with fear. Sometimes it's for political reasons, and I think we know that that is true. People want to seem powerful or to use their power. And that is a disgrace to us as a people. Where is the dignity of the victim? Where is the dignity of the person who is in prison? And where is the dignity of each of us who would allow something as horrendous as the taking of life to be done in our name for a motivation that is not a legitimate motivation, which has something to do with the weakness of a human personality? Therefore, I really think that we need to take very seriously these words and look at what is it underneath our system that causes us to imprison people and then to execute them. Surely people are not going to be a detriment to society when they are already in prison. They are already separated from the rest of us. There is no reason for our society to kill them. It is a blot on our souls. It is a blot on our way of looking at ourselves as human beings. And I think it gives an underlying tacit permission to vengeance and an underlying tacit permission to violence to people who may be suffering in our world. It's time for us to take care of the victims, to look at the causes for the murders that do happen. To look at drug use, to look at racism, to look at the lack of real employment opportunities, to look at a justice system that is so overwhelmed that it cannot do a good job, and a justice system that needs to be revamped, to look at the abuse of children, and to look at multiple claims of innocence that are throughout our state and throughout our world. I hope and pray that people will look at this new report at all costs, to look at it, to read it thoroughly, to read it indeed prayerfully, and to let it touch our hearts so that we can become a better people, a safer people, and one that really respects the life and dignity of all. That is everyone, the innocent and the non-innocent, because all of us were made in the image and likeness of God, and we need to call it forth. Thank you so much for this report, and thank you for allowing me to speak to you this morning.
Thank you so much, Sister Alice. Finally, I wanted to introduce Kendra Cashman. Kendra is a Xavier University senior in her final year there, and we had the pleasure of having her as an intern last fall, and she helped us get this ball rolling and sat with me in the clerk's office for probably longer than she wanted to, looking through files and helping put this together. So Kendra, if you have anything you'd like to say, you can go for it.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for being here. I'll keep it short. Everybody has said some really wonderful things. I think I just want to highlight, I didn't grow up in Hamilton County. I grew up in a state without the death penalty. So it wasn't really until I came to school at Xavier that I really even learned about the issue at all. I think learning about it in a climate such as Hamilton County has been really alarming and disheartening. As many people have said, the high rates of people we send to death row, especially in comparison to other counties in Ohio, but even nationally, we really are an outlier. I think, as Sister Alice said, if you take time to read this and really look through this report, you'll see that what has been found time and time again is that seeking the death penalty is much more expensive, especially in comparison to life without parole alternatives that are available. In a time of racial reckoning and conversations about the injustices of our criminal justice system and the burdens that are here, there's time and momentum to abolish the death penalty and reallocate those funds to different things within our county and our state. In Hamilton County, I think, as people have really pointed out, this can look like addressing the high rates of gun violence in our cities and helping people before murder is even an option. Otherwise, we can also reinvest and put more money into our drug systems, our drug courts, and our reentry services to get our system looking different and more effective overall. I think with the momentum going on right now, and clearly the financial and ethical burdens that will be pointed out in this report and have been talked about, there is time to change the death penalty, to abolish it, and the time to do it is now. So thank you everyone for being here.
Thanks, Kendra. I see there have been a few questions. I think the first one about the recording, I will definitely send a recording to everyone. But then the first question about the report has to do with the political likelihood of getting a bill through the General Assembly to remove the death penalty. So Hannah, if you'd want to field that.
Yeah, of course. And I believe in that question, I think it was James who asked it, he referenced this informal moratorium we have going on, given there are these, reprieves that Governor DeWine is granting as they come up. And so these reprieves that we keep seeing gave us time. And during that time, there was a temperature taking of the legislature. And what I have found is that there is unprecedented bipartisan support for repealing the death penalty. And that being said, this year, we don't foresee a bill being passed through the General Assembly, not due to the lack of support, as I just said, but time and logistically, lame duck is a crazy time of the year. without a pandemic, without an election year. So there's just not a lot of time to strategically introduce and get a bill through the General Assembly. But we are well positioned to introduce a bipartisan bill in the next General Assembly, and we're very excited about that. So I hope that answers your question.
I think the next question was one about why, oops, my chat went away. What is the main driver of the high costs, and whether that's legal fees and lawyers or if that's something else. We do have, I think this is a pretty common question when it comes to why the death penalty costs so much. Some people think that maybe it's the execution drugs, and while those aren't necessarily super cheap, that's not really the main driver. And so we have a helpful infographic page in our report that breaks this down, but there are several different costs: defense cost, court costs, prison costs, trial costs, and appeals costs. So if you think about the death penalty, the average time frame for all of these cases was about 16 and a half years. And so I would argue that part of it is the length of time that we're trying a case from start all the way to finish, only to have the sentence reduced or thrown out entirely. That's a lot of resources that the courts and lawyers and prisons are putting into this case. But I also want to make it really clear that those appeals are so very important. Just because it takes us such a long time to give a defendant the full extent of the law doesn't mean that, I would argue that it's not a speedy trial, and there are a lot of things we can do to make things happen faster. But one of those things is not decreasing the amount of appeals that capital defendants are given. Just to be really clear about that. Elwood Jones, as Sister Alice started talking about his case, we have been corresponding with him since April since January. And at that time, he had this hearing scheduled for April, and then it was postponed to August, and then it was postponed to this Friday. And just last week, he was found out that it was postponed again for next year. So he has been waiting for this trial that could essentially free him for a year in the time that we've known him. But I think it's been rescheduled even prior to us beginning to correspond with him. So, all of those things are due to an overworked justice system that has way too many cases to handle. And the death penalty just exerts extra pressure and takes away a lot of resources from other cases. So I hope that answers the question.
Jesse, there was one other question about the report, the specific numbers on page 10. I don't know if you got to think about that, but.
Yeah, I can send those numbers over in a document. I do believe that those charts are just based on information from the public defender's office, but I will be sure to spell that out so that it's clear where those numbers are coming from, and then you can look at the raw data yourself. Any other questions? Abe, if you...
Can I just add one more thought? I was asked by a reporter the other day to take him through the whole process of a capital case. And I said, well, it starts in the mother's womb. And he was taken aback by that. But if you look at just the last 5 attempted executions that this state has had, we saw people born of addicted mothers into abusive situations who grew up in horrific conditions, ending up being the killers that we try to execute. And this report talks about diverting the funds into prevention and into better resources for the community. And if that's what we did, we would prevent murder.
Thanks, Abe. Yeah, I think IJPC, in a variety of ways this year, we've really just been talking about the root causes of violence. And I think the death penalty is a perfect case of how instead of spending our money to sort of gloss over the symptoms or try to remedy some of the effects. It's really important to give people the tools they need to be successful, productive members of society, and that's how we can create justice. If there's no other questions, I will not keep you, but again, if you haven't, I'm assuming that I have everyone's email. I will send some photos, IJPC information about our speakers, and a recording of this report. So thank you all so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you all with us this morning. If you have any questions, please just give me a phone call or send me an email.